was looking at the poster downstairs, and the poster says, "The embodiment of generosity, Maitridasa." So I hope it will become clear in this talk that I am not the embodiment of generosity. He's not the embodiment of generosity, he's a really naughty boy. So we're in the third talk in our current series, and the title of the series is "For the Benefit of All Beings, the Way to the Beyond." So far, we've been introduced to a very high ideal, which is the Bodhisattva ideal. So we've seen that the Buddha exemplified a life of compassion. So he spent 40 years wandering North India, teaching the Dharma for the benefit of people to help them be liberated from suffering. But we also saw that in the 500 years after the Buddha, this compassionate spirit that he showed in his life seemed to get a bit lost. Everything got a bit formal, a bit obsessed with lists and categories, and things seemed to get a bit individualistic. So the goal of practice became to overcome your own negative mental states and to make a personal breakthrough to enlightenment. So that's where the Bodhisattva ideal emerged, to really re-emphasize the spirit of compassion in the life of the Buddha. So the Bodhisattva is a being who is motivated to practice for all living beings. So the Bodhisattva has all of their energies, all of their desires, all of their heart and mind dedicated to attaining enlightenment in order to alleviate the sufferings of all beings, to liberate all beings from suffering. So the Buddhist tradition gives us guidelines as to how a bodhisattva would practice. And one of these guidelines is in an 8th century text called the Bovie Carriers, which can be translated as a guide to the bodhisattva's way of life. So this is a guidebook about how to behave as if we were a bodhisattva. So it's a text full of sublime ideals, but it's also extremely practical and relevant to today. And the framework for that book is a list called the 10 Paramitas, or the 10 ways to the beyond. The 10 ways to move beyond self-obsession into the freedom of enlightenment, into the fullness of wisdom and compassion. So we saw last week that the first of these 10 paramitas, these ways to the beyond, is generosity, or dhamma. So generosity as a way beyond self-obsession. We saw that generosity is crucially important. It's the most effective and radical way we have to reverse our tendency to cherish ourselves above all others. Our tendency to see our needs as being most important, to be most concerned with our needs, our preferences. So generosity frees us from that. It frees us from the prison of a mind that's always chasing after things, always expecting other people to meet our needs in order to fill this aching gap that we carry around with us. I had an experience of this earlier in the week, actually. So I'm going to India in a week, and my partner who's in India called me, and he told me some very exciting news that he's got a chance of a job interview, which is very rare in India. And my immediate response was that I was disappointed because it would mean that he would miss the first 3 days of my visit. I phoned him up later and told him I was proud of him, but it was just interesting that in the moment, where my mind went was the inconvenience that was for me, the disappointment for me. So the Buddha taught that this sort of self-centered approach is the very root cause of our suffering. So generosity is a powerful tool for reducing suffering. And we saw last week that there are many ways we can give. We can give material things, we can give time, energy, we can give ourselves in friendship, we can give our knowledge and skills, we can give confidence to others. And we saw that whatever else is going on for us, there is always the option to be generous. So that option is always open to us. And finally, last week, we saw that the most important thing with generosity is to cultivate an underlying attitude and intention to give ourselves in whatever way we can to serve higher values and to serve our collective Sangha project to transform the world we live in. So that brings us up to date, up to today's talk. So we've talked about an extremely high ideal. You could even say an impossibly high ideal. So we can be inspired by that ideal, but we do have to start where we actually are. And this is always the challenge for us. So you'll see this again and again as we go through the 10 Paramitars. To stay in touch with the ideal, to be inspired by it, but also to be real about where we are, without getting despondent about how far we are from the ideal. So there's the ideal, and there's us now. And let's face it, sometimes we don't feel that we have the resources to keep on being generous. Enough of being just, I'm fed up of hearing about being generous. Maybe we feel that it's time for people to be generous to us for a change. Life can be quite brutal at times, quite hard. Events can leave us feeling drained, like we're running on empty. When we're feeling like that, the thought of being generous can be quite difficult. So this last weekend, what was due to be a restful weekend, various unexpected events took a lot of my time. I lost a lot of sleep, and I came to Monday feeling quite depleted, actually, quite exhausted. And I was thinking, I'm going to write a talk on generosity feeling like this. And at that time, my brother called and told me that my sister-in-law is very ill in hospital. She was admitted yesterday. And it's funny that actually hearing that news injected some energy and determination into me. And it's like, okay, I want to write this talk now. And I sat down and I wrote it. So I dedicate this talk to my sister-in-law, who's in the Western part. So there's times when we feel like we haven't got much left to give. There's only so much I can give, and once it's spent, then there'll be nothing left. As if we're in a desert and the water's running out, and there's this fear that there's going to be nothing left. There's been a few times in my life when I've been in that state, when I just felt I had nothing to give to anyone, when all I could do was look for others to give to me. And actually, on reflection, they were the most painful times in my life. Because actually the ability to contribute to others, the ability to give, is such a source of self-respect, actually. If I can't contribute to anything, then who am I? What's my life for? So this feeling of lacking resources, having nothing to give, no way to contribute, dry, impoverished, it's an extremely unhappy state. So there's two main conditions we need which give rise to true generosity. So the first thing is that we have to want to give. We have to genuinely want to give. There needs to be an underlying desire to make a positive contribution, an intention to be of benefit to others and to the world. And the second thing is we need to have some sense of inner abundance, inner resources, a sense that we do have something to give. There are resources we can draw upon. So the more abundant we feel in ourselves, the richer we feel in ourselves, the more likely we are to be able to be generous. So that's a crucial aspect of generosity. It's moving away from a poverty mentality, of having very limited resources which are just about to run dry, towards a riches mentality, being in contact with resources in us and around us, that we can share freely. So in a way, it's moving away from being mere consumers towards being generators of spiritual wealth. So in Buddhism, as well as having lovely lists and rational ideas and concepts, we also have archetypal images and symbols which have emerged throughout history. And these symbols express these ideas in a way that touches us more deeply, that moves us emotionally, which sort of stirs up our potential. So as well as having the language of words and concepts, we also have the language of myth and symbol and archetype, the language of the depths. So an image that's helpful here is an archetypal form of the Buddha called Ratnasambhava. So there are several archetypal forms of the Buddha which have emerged throughout history, and they communicate particular qualities of enlightenment. So some figures communicate wisdom, other figures communicate compassion, others energy, fearlessness. So these images are helpful. They help us to connect with those qualities in ourselves. Somehow we resonate with a picture much more than an idea. It can be much easier to connect with the image of a being who embodies a quality than to have it just described to us in words. So Ratnasambhava is the archetypal Buddha associated with the south. And his name means born from a jewel. So he's the form of the Buddha that emphasizes generosity and abundance. And he's also associated with beauty and creativity. So you might want to close your eyes for the next bit, or you can just look at the pictures. So imagine you're in the countryside on a hazy midsummer's day. The sun is high in the sky, streaming down light, warmth, energy on everything below. And maybe you walk into a forest to get some relief from the sun. Rays of sun pierce the forest canopy. You walk for a while and then sit down amongst the bracken, taking it all in. The birds are calling, insects are humming, squirrels are bustling around, sap is oozing from the tree trunks. Everything is lush, green, bursting with life. The whole atmosphere is thick and overflowing with life. You feel like you could just sit there forever. It's as if the abundance of nature has entered deep down into you, and the rays of the sun are filling you up to overflowing. And after some time, you feel somehow richer than before, like you have much more to give to the world. So all that is something of the quality of Ratnasambhava. So Ratnasambhava, he radiates a rich golden yellow light in all directions. And that light is compared to sunlight on a field of ripened corn. Ratnasambhava sits cross-legged on a beautiful golden yellow flower, lotus flower. And his right hand is open in the gesture of giving. And in his left hand, he holds a dazzling, scintillating jewel. And beneath Ratnasambhava, there is a team of wild stallions holding him high for all to see. So Ratnasambhava is the form of the Buddha that I connect with on a daily basis. Very often, when I sit down to meditate, you might recognise this, I'm struggling with some sense of lack in myself. I sit down feeling there's not enough of me to go around. I'm not up to this, can't do it, I'm too poor, too inadequate. And after some time connecting with Ratnasambhava, when I get up from meditation, usually I feel much more in contact with deeper resources in myself, resources around me. I get up feeling, no, there is enough. I am big enough to hold this. There are resources available. I do have something to give. So I can't explain to you how that happens, but I can just say that that's my experience of sitting with this figure. So I'll say something about some of the different elements of the image. So firstly, the open hand. The hand which is stretched out in front of him, giving. Well, the first thing to say is that it's an open hand. It's a fully open hand. One of the ethical precepts that we take in Buddhism is with open-handed generosity. I purify my body. So an open hand. So Ratnasambhava gives freely without holding back. And what he said to be giving is the gift of the three jewels, the gift of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, which are seen to be the greatest gifts of all because they are the means to liberation from suffering. So Ratnasambhava embodies generosity in its fullest, truest sense. But I don't know about you, I often find myself falling short of that as an ideal. So maybe I have a generous impulse, but before I know it, I've talked myself out of it. Or maybe doubts start to creep in. Maybe I give a bit less than I might have. There was once when I was in India, in Bodh Gaya, which is the place where the Buddha became enlightened. And I came across this family by the side of the road. The family was from central India, which was about a 24-hour journey away. And they'd run into trouble, so they were stranded in Bodh Gaya and they couldn't get back to Nagpur. So they asked me for help. And my first impulse was, yes, I can help them. And within a few seconds, that had changed into just giving them 100 rupees. So I went back to where I was staying in Bodh Gaya and I talked to some of my friends who were young Indian men. And I told them what had happened. And they said, "You did what?" And one of them got on a motorbike and he went into town and he found them and he got them to the station, paid for their ticket, put them on a train and got them back to Nagpur. And I remember the next day just feeling quite ashamed that, okay, I'd given something, but actually my generosity hadn't been open-handed. It'd been quite tight-fisted in a way. So sometimes I do give, but it's not really about being generous. It may look like generosity, but actually there can be something else going on for us. So sometimes I'll give to a situation, but underneath it I have quite strong expectation that I'm going to get something back. Maybe I expect lots of praise or gratitude, or deep down it's like I'm sort of putting something in the bank which I can draw on later. So I'll be generous to them now, and that means they'll be generous to me when I need it. So that's really a form of exchange, quite a conditional form of giving. And there's other situations where I give out a sense of obligation. So somehow I feel it's expected of me to give in that situation. So an example for that for me earlier in my life was visiting my parents. So there's 3 sons in my family, and I'm the only son who isn't married. So there was sort of pressure in myself, but also which was communicated to me that because I was the one who was free, that I would be the one that visited the aged parents. And at that time I had all sorts of stuff in relation to my parents that I needed to sort out. So I did go and visit them, but on the inside, part of me was a bit resentful, a bit begrudging. And then other situations I give because I just don't know how to say no. So somehow, again, I feel under pressure and I can't bring myself to withstand that. So in that situation, my giving, actually it's a type of giving in, or even it's like a type of martyrdom, actually. So in all those sorts of situations, whether I'm expecting something in return, or doing my duty, or I feel under pressure, part of me actually just doesn't want to give. So these types of giving usually leave me feeling drained or slightly resentful or taken for granted. Maybe I feel I'm giving too much, actually. Or maybe I'm ignoring the fact that I really don't have much to give at that time. So when my giving's like that, it's often not very effective. It's not very helpful to me or to others. So when it comes to generosity, we do need a bit of wisdom, a bit of self-awareness to decide when it's appropriate for us to give, and if so, how much. So true, open-handed, continuous generosity is a really high ideal. Sometimes we just have to admit that we're not there yet. We don't have the resources to do that. So there's a really key principle here, which is that to be truly generous, we must feel truly free not to give. Okay? So our decision to give needs to be the free decision of an autonomous individual, rather than some half-hearted, begrudging decision of someone who feels under-resourced or under pressure. So yes, actually there are times when it may be better to acknowledge that we don't want to give, or we feel that we can't give. We may need to put our foot down. So Buddhism doesn't ask us to be martyrs, it doesn't ask us to be ascetics. Of course, there is another option. The other option is to change our own attitude. So with the story about visiting my parents, that's what happened. So a point came where I just broke through that resentment and actually really started to feel grateful for everything that they'd given me in my life. And as soon as I'd, in my mind, decided that, I wanted to give back to them, I really love them, and I wanted to visit them, take care of them, then it changed the whole experience. And they noticed it. They told me that there was a different quality to my visits. So we can reflect more deeply on the situation and realise that actually we do genuinely want to be generous, and then make a wholehearted, free decision to do that. So then we have the jewel in Ratnasambhava's left hand. So jewels, they're powerful symbols of wealth and abundance. So human beings throughout the ages have seen jewels as precious and valuable. Actually, jewels, they're just a particular combination of atoms, aren't they? But funnily, human beings have always been attracted to them and seen them as powerful, precious, valuable. And if you come across a jewel, then that opens up new possibilities in your life. But the jewel in Ratnasambhava's hand is no ordinary jewel. It's a priceless jewel. It's what's called the Wishfulfilling Jewel. The jewel that grants all wishes, that meets all needs, that supplies all resources. And in Buddhism, this jewel, this wish-fulfilling jewel, represents the heart and the mind that is devoted to practicing for the benefit of all. So that rich, abundant attitude is seen as even more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel. So Ratnasambhava's two hands are... I've forgotten something. I have a jewel. So this is when you go, ooh. So Ratnasambhava's two hands are related. So one hand reaching out and giving, another hand holding this precious jewel. So it's the jewel in his left hand that means that generosity is always possible. So for Ratnasambhava, there are no lack of resources. There's no drying up. There's no need to hold anything back. But it goes the other way too. So the act of giving actually increases his sense of abundance. I do have something to contribute. I do have resources and qualities. Can make a difference. So generosity flows naturally out of a sense of abundance. But rather than that emptying us, we feel even more enriched. So, I mean, you may have experienced this in quite an ordinary sense. When you're giving freely to a situation that you really believe in, you're quite passionate about, you feel richer and energized through that generosity. In fact, writing this talk was an example of that, because I was talking about how I was feeling quite depleted before writing it, and actually by the end of writing the talk, I felt much richer, much more energized. So this abundant, generous attitude of practicing for the benefit of all beings is talked about a lot in the text that I was talking about, the Bodhicarrier Avatara. So yeah, this attitude is described as the elixir of life, a priceless treasure that ends poverty on earth, a brilliant sun dispelling the mists of ignorance. And the Bodhisattva, through their efforts, aspires to become an inexhaustible treasure for those who are in need, a wish-fulfilling jewel that enriches all beings. So that's the mind of a Bodhisattva. The mind of a Bodhisattva overflows with riches. It's completely free from any sense of lack. So it doesn't need to hoard, it doesn't need to hold on, it doesn't need to hold back. And it's always wishing to enrich the lives of others. But yes, once again, we have to start from where we're really at. So yeah, let's face it, we don't always feel so rich, so abundant, so well-resourced. We don't feel like we're overflowing with things to give. We don't feel so in touch with an abundant mind. We live in a very busy and demanding world, which often leaves us feeling stretched and depleted. So of course, our generosity is limited. Why wouldn't it be? But actually, abundance is something that we can cultivate. And it's really important to do this so that generosity can flow more naturally, more freely. So how can we do that? How can we cultivate a sense of abundance? How can we make sure that there is a jewel in our hands? So this isn't a Buddhist list. This is just a few reflections from my experience. It's not exhaustive at all. So the first thing I've said is reflect on what you're doing already. So yeah, it's really important not to undervalue the efforts that you're already making. Day in, day out, gradually putting the effort in. So we make effort in the area of ethics. So by making ethical changes, we're gradually resolving inner conflicts within us and freeing up more energy. And then we put effort into meditation. So yeah, by meditating, we're gradually increasing our awareness of ourselves, coming more into contact with the inner depths of our being. And then we put effort into reading and studying the Buddha's teachings. So when we're doing that, it's as if we are mining the riches of the Buddhist tradition. And then we put effort into being part of this Sangha. So by being part of a Sangha, we're learning to see ourselves less in terms of our own limited abilities and more in terms of combining our resources with others. I'd like to rejoice in a couple of people at this stage because, yesterday at the point of, how am I going to write this talk, I got 2 emails. The one was from Sakshioti, and she said, "Would you like me to write the talk?" Which I thought was amazing. So thanks for that. And the other one was from Surimati. Surimati knew what had been going on for me, and she just really encouraged me and said, "I know that you're big enough to hold this. I know that you can do this." So, that's an example of how being part of a Sangha can really increase the resources that we've got to draw on. So we make efforts in all these areas, and we can be confident that our efforts are gradually bearing fruit. So we are setting up positive effects that will ripple out through time, through space, and we can be confident that they will be benefiting others. There may be others that we never meet, but we can be confident that these efforts will bear fruit. So when we reflect on the efforts that we are making, that can actually connect us with a sense of richness. And then giving yourself to worthwhile tasks, to meaningful tasks. So if we can do that, if we can take part in worthwhile projects that benefit others, then that can go a long way to unlocking blocked energy. So when we're involved in something that we really believe in and we can clearly see is of benefit to others, new resources and confidence seems to emerge from somewhere. So there's many opportunities for doing that around the centre. So people who support introductory courses, so they give 12 weeks of their time, 12 Wednesday evenings, and they get immediate feedback from that their efforts are changing people's lives in just a matter of a few weeks. You can volunteer, you can be one of the 70, 80, 90 volunteers who help out at the summer fair, which is on June the 26th. Working with many others to raise loads of money, which we then just give away to projects around the world. You can bring really lovely food to the Baked Potato Club. The main thing we can do is come and take part. It's coming and taking part in large numbers that gives this sense of abundance. You might even consider coming on our next Sangha retreat, which is at the end of July. And a coach load of us will be going down to Herefordshire and spending a weekend in beautiful countryside, cultivating abundance amongst us. Okay, and then rising to new challenges. So sometimes life throws up challenges which are opportunities to stretch ourselves. And my experience of this is usually that I have to dig deeper. And by digging deeper, I discover new resources that I didn't realise were there. So 3 months ago, I became chair of the Sheffield Buddhist Centre, which I didn't really feel up to, if I'm honest. And sometimes I still don't feel up to it. Sometimes I feel completely knackered, overstretched. But generally, as time's going on, I'm becoming aware of resources I didn't know I had. It's like, I have to dig deep. I have to find what there is down there and respond to the challenges that come up. And I'm also able to, because I work in teams around the centre, I'm able to draw on the riches of many people around me. Okay, the next one is to do things that you enjoy doing. That's easy, isn't it? Do things that you enjoy. So it's important to notice what actually nourishes us, what actually is enjoyable to us, what gives us pleasure, and to do more of that. Otherwise, things can just get a bit dry, a bit stale. So the main principle is avoiding harm to ourselves and others. But otherwise, do what gives you enjoyment. Why wouldn't you do that? Find pleasure, find nourishment in your life. And there's no prescribed list about what you should enjoy. This isn't a spiritual list. I live in a community of 7 guys, so there's someone who's really into sailing, there's someone who's really into allotments, someone who's really into hockey, someone who does triathlons, bizarrely. Once a week, I visit my friend's horse, and I spend time with this horse, taking care of it outside in the countryside. I like going into town for coffee and cake. Music concerts with my mum. Today I was walking around, so to prepare for this talk today, I was walking around town listening to my favourite Prince tracks. So I was really partying like it's 1999. So yeah, when we consciously do things that give us wholesome enjoyment, then we tend to have more of our energies on board. It's as if we're sort of signalling to a part of ourselves that it's okay to do things I enjoy. It's okay to do things that give me pleasure. It's really important not to forget about those things. So sometimes we can sort of get really excited about Buddhism and, tick the checklist, working on ethics, meditation, study, meet with friends, and we can forget about all the things in our life that used to give us loads of pleasure. So it's really important not to sort of lose sight of those simple, natural, wholesome enjoyments in our life, in the name of being a good Buddhist. We can open up to beauty, we can spend time in beautiful surroundings. So this could be natural beauty, it could be artistic beauty. So when we do that, it's like we're imbibing, taking in the beauty and abundance of life around us. So like sitting in that wood on a summer's day that I talked you through. You might just go out into the Sheffield Buddhist Centre garden, enjoy that wonderful, abundant garden that many volunteers keep going. So these situations of being in beauty, they help us to really feel a part of life, rather than just being spectators or consumers. We start to feel a solidarity with the whole of life. We feel ourselves as part of life. Become more aware of life with a sense of appreciation. And the last top tip is make space. Many of us lead busy lives where we move from one task to another task to another task without really pausing for breath. So it's as if the whole of our life becomes one long to-do list. And even when we have a day off, we can make a to-do list of how we're going to best use our day off. So it can be really good sometimes just to have a real day off, a day with no plans, no aims, no objectives. A day when we can really rest, really stop. In the first talk, Satyajoti talked about a verse from the Bovie Carriers, which says that the Bodhisattva's attitude to tasks is like an elephant on a hot day who plunges into a pool, covers himself in cool water, comes out of the pool, and plunges into the next one, does the same, goes from pool to pool. But the following verse, after that, says that it's really important when your energy is flagging to rest, to really rest, to recharge, and then when you start to feel more abundant, then you go into the next task. So when we actually take time to pause, to rest, we can often touch base with a deeper, richer part of ourselves than if we sort of set out to do lots of worthwhile things. So those are some ideas. But we're all different, and different things work for different people. Nobody can tell you what's going to give you a sense of inner abundance. Very often we can have quite a scientific approach to Buddhist practice, quite methodical, almost as if we're conducting a chemist's experiment. So it's like 100 milligrams of meditation and 100 milligrams of Dharma study and a few grams of generosity and a few grams of meeting friends. And somehow that's going to give a magic result. But actually, most of living a spiritual life, living life as a Buddhist, it's an art. It's an art that you have to pick up over the years. You have to find ways to make it work for you in the conditions of your life, and given your temperaments, given your passions. But somehow we need to find a way to make things work so that we don't dry up, so that we are keeping some sense of inner abundance, some sense of resources we can draw on. Because generosity emerges from that. You know, generosity at its best is something very natural and spontaneous that just comes up when we feel abundant, when we feel rich. So it's not just something we do because it's supposed to be good for us. It's actually a sign that transformation is underway. So finally, I just want to say something about the horses that hold Ratnasambhava high. Actually, when I first came across this image, it was the horses that first drew me to the image. Somehow I recognised something of myself in the horses. So horses, like jewels, they're symbols of wealth, actually. They're symbols of nobility. So throughout history, if you had a horse, that meant something. That was a sign of wealth. So there was something quite compelling for me about seeing a team of wild horses holding up the Buddha. I definitely recognised their wildness in me. So no matter how tame a horse seems to be, there's always something a bit edgy, a bit unpredictable, a bit nervy about it, some untamed quality. But also I recognised their willingness to serve. So they're serving the Buddha, they're holding the Buddha high. So it's not that they've been domesticated or subjugated by the whip. It's more that all of their wild, powerful, abundant energies have been trained, they've been harnessed. They're bristling with energy, really, really powerful. And they're freely giving themselves to that project of holding up the Buddha, holding up higher ideals, noble values. They're freely dedicating themselves to something truly worthwhile. And they're doing it as a team. So to me, they are an embodiment of the abundance of energy and generosity that can arise in a Sangha. And that's the Sangha we can all aspire to be part of.